China's President Xi Jinping has secured a historic third term as the Communist Party's leader, cementing his place as the nation's most influential ruler since Mao Zedong. The Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party elected Xi Jinping as its general secretary for a precedent-breaking 5-year term, tilting the country decisively back towards one-man rule after decades of power sharing among its elites. Xi Jinping is now all but certain to sail through to a third term as China's president, due to be formally announced during the government's annual legislative sessions March next year. The Central Committee also named a 7-member Politburo Standing Committee led by President Xi, its inner circle of power dominated by his allies. And joining me now in the studio for a broad look into Chinese leadership and global perceptions is a global affairs analyst, Collins Onweke. Good to have you. For the first time, I can say you're joining me in the studio. It's always joining me via Zoom.
Thank you.
Good to have you in the country.
Thank you. Thank you, Precious, for having me.
All right, so let's talk about this. All eyes have been on China in the past few days to see how, I mean, this was already very much in the works. Everybody knew how this was going to turn up. He was going to be elected for a third term. But many analysts have said that this is a proof that he's in charge and has absolute power in China. Has President Xi finally centralized power in his hands in China?
Obviously. And this, like you alluded to, comes as no surprise to anyone because since 2012, when he became the general secretary of his party, and then in 2013, when he ascended the throne as president, everything he has done has actually been geared towards this moment, the moment of actually mounting the leadership as, for the third term. And so, no, it doesn't come as a surprise. And he has consolidated power and is set now to actually solidify the whole notion of China having a one-party system ruled by one individual, Xi himself.
And I picked out carefully there where you said he ascended the throne. I mean, that would usually be for monarchs, but I know that you used it carefully and deliberately because a throne, it is indeed. He did not name a successor. No. It doesn't look like there is a successor in the works, which means that he could consolidate power even more than a three-year term. Yeah. And when you also look at the standing committee, they are made up of allies, especially Li Chang was the one person who caught everyone's eye. He was the one in charge of the long Shanghai lockdown. What does this mean for China and the Chinese people?
Well, essentially, you can look at it from two perspectives. For the Chinese people, Xi is good news. He is good news because he has managed over the period that he's been on power to ensure that poverty gradually but incrementally is eliminated. Okay, he's seen the farthest reaching reforms to ensure that development is actually brought to the rural areas of China, and he did all of this from his own personal perspective. Let us not forget that as a teenager, he was actually banished to the rural area, and he tested what it is to be poor, to be struggling, and to be, a labor person. So he drew from all of those experiences to actually remodel China. So yes, for the Chinese people, they probably don't care at all that he has actually installed himself in power for life. However, his rivals, both within China and outside of China, particularly the Western Alliance, are actually worried. They are concerned about the authoritarianism that he brings.
And I wanted to get to that, but interesting that you already mentioned it because he again, the rhetoric we hear all the time when he makes his speech is the fact that the complete reunification of China is a must. He talks about how it can be done peacefully, but if need be, there will be use of force. How do you think that Taiwan and the West are interpreting this? And is he more likely to be brutal in this third term?
They are not interpreting it in the best of terms. Even Xi himself actually acknowledged the fact that China is in more crisis now in the eyes of the Western Alliance than it has ever been before.
Absolutely.
Now.
He talked about the winds and then the storms ahead.
Absolutely. And then he also recognized that China needs the world just as the world needs China. So he understands the delicate balance that he really needs to achieve and the tightrope that he's got to walk. However, he's a man with very great resolve. Now, one of the things that he's done in the line of consolidating power is that amongst his rivals, he has picked the most strategic and made sure that they are appointed into the 205 member seat of a committee that oversees the entire affairs of the country. So what that means essentially is that the guy is left with no opposition. And so he can just go on ruthlessly and do what he has to do. Going to China-Hong Kong relationship, in the past, they had emphasized the notion of collaborating, working with them in partnership and all of that. But right now, the Constitution has been amended in the run-up to this election to ensure that China, the policy there is restrain them, contain them, and ensure that there is no question of independence. So you see, it's a very brutal years ahead that we are seeing. He's going to be 70 next year, but indeed, like you mentioned, there is no mention of a successor because he has no succession
do you think,
plans.
Absolutely. Do you think that he's going to go move for a fourth term? And could he become the most powerful leader in China? That's one question. And then is the Russian president, because the Russian president has congratulated him, is the Russian president also looking at this and taking notes?
Yeah, it will surprise me if he doesn't go for a fourth term and even a fifth term. I think we're looking at Mr. Xi that is set to be in power as long as he's alive. So, like I said, it will surprise me if he isn't. Now, of course, birds of the same feather, flock together. One of the first to congratulate him was, Vladimir Putin,
and the North Korean leader as well.
Yes, and I mean, the congratulation was in very flowing, very flowery words. So, what it tells us is that he is actually somebody that he admires, somebody that he takes inspiration from. And I mean, it goes without saying that health allowing him, he's going to remain there. He's going to draw a lot of examples from what Xi has done in China to ensure that he further, disenfranchises the opposition, eliminates them totally to ensure that, he stays put there.
And we're watching developments in China and all that could play out, especially as he will be announced formally in March next year.
Yeah.
Great to have you in person again, Collins Oweke, Global Affairs Analyst.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me. And happy to be in the country.